I was 43 minutes into waiting when the door finally opened. I know it was 43 minutes because I had been watching the clock above the bar with the specific attention of someone who has run out of things to do with his hands, and because I had, at the 30-minute mark, made a private decision that I would give it until 45 and then go home, and I was 2 minutes from that mark when the door came open. And a woman came through it like she had been running from something, or towards something, or both at once. And beside her, holding her hand and looking at the world with enormous interested eyes, was a little boy. That's the part I didn't expect. Cousin Rachel had not mentioned a little boy. The woman's name was Vivian. She was 27, worked as a freelance illustrator, and had brown hair that had started the evening in some kind of order and ended it very much not. She was breathing hard. Her bag was slipping off her shoulder. She had the expression of someone conducting a real-time calculation of how bad this looked and finding the results unfavorable. And the boy beside her, who was maybe 6 years old and wearing a dinosaur on his shirt and shoes that blinked when he took steps, had not been running at all. He had been taking in the world very carefully, with the kind of attention that belongs to children who are still deciding what everything means. Vivian's eyes found me in the back booth. I could tell because her expression changed, relief arriving fast, followed immediately by the specific variant of mortification that belongs to people who know exactly how something looks and cannot do anything about it. She pulled the boy toward my booth. "You're Daniel," she said when she reached me. Not a question, just a confirmation, offered between breaths. "I'm Vivian. I know. I know what this is, and I'm sorry. It was, there was a situation, and I had to, and I didn't have any way to." She stopped herself, looked down at the boy. The boy was not looking at Vivian. He was looking at me with an intensity that was specific and focused, the way a scientist looks at something through a lens. His eyes moved across my face in a way that felt like he was taking notes. Then he lifted one hand and made a quick gesture, fingers moving. Vivian's whole expression changed. The mortification softened into something warmer. She signed something back to him, then looked at me. "He says you have kind eyes." I had been 43 minutes into leaving. I had my jacket halfway off my shoulders in the direction of putting it on. I sat back down. "Tell him thank you," I said. Then I thought about it. I had a coworker named Sol who was deaf, and we had worked together for 3 years, and he had spent most of that time teaching me signs in between jobs, because he said if I was going to keep working alongside him, I might as well be able to say something useful. I looked at the boy and I signed, slowly and badly, "Thank you. Nice shoes." The boy looked at his shoes, stomped once to make them blink, and smiled at me like I had passed a test. Vivian stared at me. "You know sign language?" "Some," I said. "Not well. I know the warehouse vocabulary." "What warehouse vocabulary?" "Careful. Heavy. Where's the forklift? Don't do that. The essentials." She almost laughed. Not quite, but close. The shape of it was there. "This is my nephew Felix," she said. "He's 6. My sister was supposed to pick him up from his after-school program and she didn't. And her phone has been going to voicemail for an hour, and I didn't have—" She stopped again. "If you want to leave, I understand. I can just—" "Sit down," I said. I moved my jacket to make room. "Have you two eaten?" Vivian stood there for a moment, the way people stand when they were prepared for something to go badly, and it hasn't yet, and they haven't quite adjusted. Then she sat. Felix sat beside her, and he immediately looked at the laminated kids menu that had been on the table since I arrived, and he turned it over to the back where there was a small maze on the cardboard, and he started solving it with the focused calm of someone who knows what he wants to do and is doing it. "I really am sorry," Vivian said. "You can stop apologizing," I said. "I was 2 minutes from leaving, and now I'm not. Something's going right." She looked at me for a moment. Her expression was still doing a lot. Processing the evening, running the calculations, deciding whether this situation was salvageable. Then something in it settled. "He doesn't talk," she said. Not explaining, but not apologizing either. Just stating it, the way you state facts about people you love. "He's been deaf since he was born. He uses sign language and sometimes he writes things down or draws them." "Good artist?" I asked. "He drew a perfect 2-scale diagram of our neighborhood when he was 4. His mother had it framed." I looked at Felix. He had finished the maze and was now drawing something in the margin of the kids' menu with a crayon he had apparently produced from somewhere on his person. I watched his hand moving. What's he drawing? Vivian looked. A velocipedator, she said. Velocipedator? Velociraptor. He's been calling them that for 8 months, and no one has had the heart to correct it. I wouldn't either, I said. We ordered. I got Felix's attention and signed slowly. What do you want? And he signed back faster than I could follow. And Vivian translated. Grilled cheese, no crust. And could he have the apple juice that comes in the little bottle? Because the cups at restaurants are too big, and he always spills them. I relayed this to the server. Felix watched the whole exchange with his head tilted slightly to one side, and then he signed something to Vivian, and Vivian covered her mouth. What? I said. He says you sign like a caveman, she said, but a nice one. I looked at Felix. Fair enough, I said. Felix grinned. The dinner lasted longer than I expected. I learned that Vivian had been illustrating children's books for 4 years, working on contract for small publishers mostly, and had 2 books coming out the following spring with her name on the cover for the first time. I learned that she lived 15 minutes from the restaurant in an apartment that she described as extremely small and very full of art supplies, and that she had a cat named Hector who was large and orange and had opinions. I learned that she and Felix's mother, her older sister Claudia, had always been close even when Claudia was going through hard times, and that Claudia had been going through hard times recently in ways that Vivian didn't detail, but that I heard in the careful neutrality of how she talked about her. I learned that Felix was brilliant and specific and had already decided, at 6 years old, that he wanted to be either a paleontologist or a graphic designer depending on whether the velocipedators turned out to be real or not. I told Felix this information about the velocipedators was unfortunately settled, and he looked at me, and I signed as carefully as I could. They were real a long time ago. He sat with this for a moment, and then signed something that Vivian translated as, "Then I'll be a designer who draws dinosaurs." Problem solved. I told him that sounded like an excellent plan. Somewhere around 8:30, Felix fell half asleep against Vivian's shoulder, his velocipedator drawing still in one hand. She was talking about a project she'd been working on for months, a picture book about a child who communicates differently from the other children in her class, and how she'd been drawing and redrawing the main character because she kept not quite getting her right, and then one evening she'd looked at a drawing Felix had done of himself and the character had finally arrived. She looks like him, I said. She signs like him, Vivian said. The way he holds his hands when he's making up signs for things he doesn't know the word for yet. She does that. I looked at Felix asleep against her shoulder. That's a good book, I said. You haven't read it? I know, but that's a good book. Vivian looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite read. Why did you stay? She said. I was 2 minutes from leaving, I said. I told you. But you didn't leave. I thought about it. Because your nephew told me I had kind eyes, I said, and I wanted to see if he was right. In the parking lot, Felix was fully asleep now, which had happened around the car ride calculation. Small sleeping child plus very late equals Vivian carrying him to whatever came next. I offered to carry him to her car. She looked at me for a second and then said yes. He was heavier than he looked and completely limp with sleep, which is the specific dead weight of a very asleep child, and I carried him across the parking lot while Vivian got the car door, and I got him settled in the back seat, with the focused, practical attention of someone who has done this before. I hadn't done this before, but it felt like the right thing to do, and I did it. Vivian stood beside the car after I straightened up. The parking lot light was doing something orange and indirect across the cars. She was looking at Felix through the window with the expression of someone who loves a person very much and is also very tired. He said you were going to be okay, she said, without looking at me. When? In the restaurant, when he saw you across the room, before I even came over. He signed to me that the man in the back booth was going to be okay. She paused. He means it as a compliment. It's the highest thing he gives. I looked at Felix asleep in the back seat. High bar, I said. Very high bar. She turned to look at me. The parking lot light was less flattering than the restaurant, but it didn't matter. Can I get your number? Not, she paused, not as whatever this was supposed to be, as a do-over. A first proper date. I didn't give this a fair. You gave it a completely fair start, I said. The start was good. She looked at me. Same time next week, I said. Wherever you want. And if Felix needs to come, he can come. He's better company than the menu. Something in her face changed then. Not dramatically, just the specific shift that happens when someone was braced for worse and received better. She gave me her number. I gave her mine. She drove away and I stood in the parking lot for a moment and thought about a 6-year-old boy who decided in 30 seconds that I was going to be okay, and turned out to be right. The weeks that came after were the kind that add up before you notice them adding. We went to dinner without Felix the following Saturday, properly, as Vivian had wanted, and she arrived on time and her hair was in order and she was nervous in the way that people are nervous when they care about something going right. It went right. We stayed at the table until the restaurant made the sounds that meant they wanted us to leave, and neither of us wanted to go yet. So we walked along the river instead and talked about everything and nothing for another hour in the October cold. And then things with Claudia got harder. Vivian told me on a Tuesday, matter-of-factly, the way she told me most things. Claudia had been struggling for longer than the restaurant night. It had started 2 years ago when a relationship ended badly and had been going in one direction since then. In the past few weeks, it had gotten to the point where Claudia wasn't showing up consistently for Felix, and Vivian had started filling in more gaps, and the gaps were getting larger. She's not a bad person, Vivian said. She's not okay right now, and Felix can't pay the price for that. No, I said. I'm probably going to be picking up a lot more of this, she said. I know that changes things. What things? She looked at me. Whatever this is. This doesn't change, I said. Felix is part of this. He has been since the first night. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, most people would find this complicated. Most people haven't had Felix tell them they're going to be okay, I said. That's a hard thing to walk back from. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Not dramatically, just steadily. Tell me about Soul, she said. So I told her about Soul, about the 3 years working alongside him in the warehouse, and the signs he'd taught me in between jobs. About how he'd said one day, while we were on a break eating lunch in the loading dock, that most hearing people treated him like he needed to be accommodated rather than like he needed to be understood, and that there was a difference, and that the difference was everything. About how that sentence had stayed with me in the specific way that true things stay. Felix says something similar, Vivian said, in his own way. Not with words, obviously, but if you try to manage around him instead of just being with him, he knows. He always knows. He knew I was going to be okay in 30 seconds, I said. He was reading you, she said. He watches people's faces and hands more closely than anyone I've ever met. The night you signed badly at the restaurant, he wasn't mocking you. He was saying you were trying in the right direction. Good direction, I said. Bad execution. He doesn't care about execution, she said. He cares about intention. I started practicing more. Not formally. I didn't sign up for a class or buy a book, though I thought about both. I practiced in the way you practice when you care about something, consistently, without making a big thing of it, a few signs at a time on my phone in the evenings, and then more when Felix was around to correct me, which he did with absolute professional severity and occasional visible amusement. He corrected me one evening when I got the sign for dinosaur wrong. I had been close, but not right. And when I got it right on the second attempt, he made a sign I didn't know, and I asked Vivian what it meant. He says you're a fast learner, she said. That's generous, I said. I'm a slow learner. I just don't stop. Felix watched my face when I said this, even though he couldn't hear the words. Then he signed something to Vivian. She laughed. He says that's the same thing, she said. 3 months after the restaurant, Claudia had a crisis that required Vivian to go to her immediately. I was at Vivian's apartment when the call came in. It was 9 on a Friday night. Felix was asleep in the converted closet space that Vivian had made into a room for him, with a small bed and a shelf of drawings and a nightlight shaped like a moon. She had done the conversion herself over a weekend, with tools she borrowed and instructions she found online, and it was small, but it was his. Vivian put the phone down. I have to go, she said. Go, I said. I'll stay with Felix. She looked at me. Daniel. I know where the snacks are. I know the sign for water and dinosaur, and I think I know the sign for nightmare, but you should confirm that before you go. She confirmed it. She also wrote down 3 more signs on a piece of paper and left it on the counter and kissed me quickly and went. I sat in the living room in the quiet of a sleeping apartment and thought about how I had been 43 minutes into leaving a restaurant 3 months ago. I thought about a boy with blinking shoes who had looked at me and decided in 30 seconds what kind of person I was. I thought about the specific mercy of being seen clearly by someone who has no reason to be charitable, chooses to be anyway. Felix woke up once, around 11. He stood in the doorway of his small room and looked at me in the living room, and his expression went through several things: confusion, location, calculation, and then settled. He came out and sat beside me on the couch and picked up the drawing pad from the coffee table and started drawing, not explaining himself, just existing in the same space. I signed, "Nightmare?" He shook his head, "Just awake." I signed, "Okay, I'm here." He looked at me for a moment. Then he went back to drawing. He drew for about 20 minutes, and then he fell asleep again, right there on the couch, the drawing pad still in his lap. I took the pad so it wouldn't fall, and looked at what he'd been drawing. It was the three of us, me, Vivian, and Felix. We were sitting at a table, the restaurant table, recognizable from the details, the laminated menus, the little apple juice bottle. He had given all three of us slightly exaggerated eyes. Vivian's were warm. Mine were, I noted with something I couldn't name, extremely kind. I sat with that drawing until Vivian came home at midnight. She came in quietly, saw Felix asleep on the couch, saw me with the drawing pad in my hands. She stood in the doorway for a moment. "How is she?" I said. "Stable," she said, "for tonight." She sat down on the other side of Felix. We sat there on either side of him for a while without talking. The apartment was very quiet. "He drew us," I said, and showed her the pad. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me over Felix's sleeping head, and there were tears in her eyes. Not from sadness exactly, from something else. "He keeps that drawing pad by his bed," she said. "He only draws people he considers his." I looked at the drawing, at the three figures at the table with the exaggerated eyes. "I think I've been his since the restaurant," I said. "Yes," she said. "You have." She reached across Felix's sleeping shape and took my hand. We sat like that for a while, in the quiet apartment, on either side of a 6-year-old who had decided on first sight that I was going to be okay and had been patiently waiting for me to understand what that meant. The months after that were not simple. Claudia's situation required sustained attention, and Vivian gave it, because that is the kind of person she is, and I tried to make sure that my presence was one fewer thing she had to manage, rather than one more. I started showing up with food on the evenings I knew were long. I learned more signs, not the warehouse vocabulary anymore, real ones, the ones that came up with Felix specifically, the ones for his velocipedators, and his particular brand of humor, and the sign he used when he was done with a conversation and needed the room to be quieter. Felix started showing me his drawings. Not all of them, he kept some private, in a folder he stored under his small bed, but the ones he was working on, the velocipedators and the houses and the people he drew with their exaggerated telling eyes. He drew Hector the cat 3 times in 1 week because he couldn't get the orange right and kept starting over, and he showed me each version, and I learned to read his expression, to know if he wanted feedback or just acknowledgement. Mostly just acknowledgement. He was his own harshest critic, and he knew it. One Saturday afternoon, I was helping Vivian rearrange the studio corner of her apartment. She had been given a proper book deal with a proper deadline and needed more working space. And Felix appeared and watched us for a while, and then took the pencil from behind his ear and started marking measurements on the wall in very small numbers. "Felix," Vivian said. He looked at her with the expression of someone who has a plan and would appreciate not being interrupted. She looked at me. I shrugged. He measured and marked for about 20 minutes. Then he showed us what he'd mapped out, a corner arrangement that used the space better than anything Vivian had been considering, making room for a drafting table on the left and shelves on the right, and leaving a clear path to the window. Vivian stood looking at it for a long moment. "That's better than my plan," she said. Felix looked modest and also entirely aware that it was better than her plan. "The kid's a spatial genius," I said. "The kid knows," Vivian said. Felix signed something at me. I caught 3 words and guessed the rest. Something about the arrangement working better with the light. "I got some of that," I said to him. He signed again, slower, and I got more of it. "Is he correcting your understanding of spatial reasoning?" Vivian said. "He is," I said. "He's not wrong." Felix looked satisfied. We rearranged the studio according to Felix's plan, with the drafting table on the left and the shelves on the right, and the clear path to the window. It was better. Vivian stood in it afterward and turned slowly, assessing it the way she assessed all spaces, and then she nodded once. He gets it from Claudia, she said. She used to rearrange the furniture every few months. Our mother used to say she could walk into any room and tell you immediately what was wrong with it. Must run in the family, I said. Vivian looked at me. You think I do that? You walked into the restaurant on our first date and glanced around, and I watched your expression do something with the lighting before you even found me in the booth. She stared at me. You noticed that? I notice things, I said. She looked at me for a moment with an expression that was doing several things. Then she said, Daniel. Yeah. I'm going to say something, and I need you to not make a structural engineer joke about it. I'm not a structural engineer. I know. I need you to not make the equivalent joke for whatever you are. I'm a warehouse logistics coordinator, I said. We don't have a joke. Good, she said. She looked at me steadily. I love you. I've been not saying it for 3 months. Because the timing was always complicated or something was happening and I kept waiting for a better moment. But Felix just rearranged my studio and I think I understand now that I've been waiting for the wrong thing. The moment doesn't have to be better. The moment just has to be said. I looked at her. Then I looked at Felix, who was standing in the corner of the rearranged studio, looking at the shelves with the expression of someone checking that his arrangement was holding up structurally. Felix, I said. He turned. I signed, thank you for that first night, for seeing me correctly. He looked at me for a moment. Then he signed back. I caught most of it. He says you saw him correctly too, Vivian said softly. First night. I looked at Vivian. I love you, I said. I've known it for a while. I've been not saying it for the same reason you have, which is that I thought there needed to be a better moment. There doesn't need to be a better moment, she said. No, I said. There doesn't. She crossed the rearranged studio and I met her halfway, which is the only way it should ever work. Felix, to his credit, was very interested in the shelves and did not appear to notice anything, though I'm fairly certain he did. He is, after all, the one who saw it first. I want to talk about Sol for a moment, because he belongs in this story more than I have accounted for. Sol and I had worked together in the same warehouse for 3 years before any of this happened. He was 34, efficient, funny in a dry way that worked in sign language just as well as it would have in speech. And he had the specific quality of someone who has spent their whole life navigating a world built for people who are not quite like him, and has arrived at a kind of patience about it that is not passive but earned. He knew exactly how much effort it took most hearing people to communicate with him. He noticed who made the effort and who managed around it. He told me once during one of our lunch break sessions in the loading dock that the people who managed around him rather than with him were not necessarily unkind. They just hadn't decided he was worth the effort yet. I thought about that sentence for a long time after he said it. I thought about it again, differently, on the night Vivian and I had dinner for the first time, and she told me Felix was deaf, and I had signed badly to him from across the booth. I had not known I was making a decision in that moment. I had just done the thing that seemed most directly useful. But thinking about what Sol had told me, I understood afterward that I had made a decision, even if unconsciously, to be with Felix rather than around him, to make the effort that said you are worth the communicating to. Felix knew that is what Vivian meant when she said he had told her I was going to be okay before she even came over to my booth. He had watched me from across the restaurant for 30 seconds and read something in the way I held myself, in my hands, in my eyes. He has spent 6 years learning to read people from everything except sound, and he is very good at it, and what he read in me was enough. I have thought about what he read. I have tried to understand it. I think what he saw was someone who was tired enough that they had stopped pretending to be otherwise. And that's what kind eyes means to Felix. Not sweetness, not sentimentality, but the specific unguardedness of someone who is exactly who they are right now. He can read performance. He can read people who are presenting a version of themselves. He is, in that sense, a more reliable judge of character than most adults I know. And he looked at me from across a restaurant booth and saw a man who was 43 minutes into being stood up and 2 minutes from leaving, not putting a good face on it, just sitting there being exactly that. And he decided I was going to be okay. He was right, but he would be the first to point out, with the professional severity he brings to all corrections, that his being right was not the interesting part. The interesting part was why he chose to say it. I asked him about this once, months later. Not directly. We had developed by then a way of talking about things sideways, which is perhaps the only way to talk about real things with a 6-year-old. We were working on a drawing together. I was not good at drawing, but I had been recruited as a collaborator on a velocipedator reconstruction that required more arms than Felix was comfortable managing alone. And we were at the kitchen table with pencils and the large newsprint pad Vivian kept for him. I signed, "When you first saw me. How did you know?" He looked up from the drawing. His expression did something, not thoughtful exactly, more like patient with a slow learner. He signed back. I caught about half of it and asked Vivian to translate the rest. "He says," Vivian said, "that your eyes were paying attention, not to the food or the door or the room, just paying attention. He says most people look at everything except what's actually there." I thought about this. "What was there?" I asked. Vivian relayed it. Felix signed. "He says he was there," she translated, "and you saw him." I had seen him, before Vivian introduced us. Before he signed anything, I had seen a small boy in a dinosaur shirt with blinking shoes, who was looking at the world with enormous, interested eyes. And my instinct had been immediate and clear. This kid is paying close attention. Pay close attention back. He knew, in 6 years of being somewhere people managed around rather than with, he knew what it looked like when someone was doing the other thing. I have thought a lot about what Sol would make of Felix and about what Felix would make of Sol. I think they would understand each other immediately in the way that people who have spent their lives in the same particular kind of effort sometimes do. I brought Felix to the warehouse once, on a Saturday when Vivian had a deadline and the warehouse was quiet, and Sol happened to be there catching up on some inventory. Sol looked at Felix. Felix looked at Sol. Felix signed something. Sol signed something back, faster and more fluently than I could follow. Felix's eyes went wide, then delighted, then extremely focused. They spent 45 minutes signing while I moved inventory in the next aisle, and when I came back, Sol was teaching Felix a sign I didn't recognize, and Felix was correcting his grip on something else, and both of them had the expression of experts in the same field who have finally found each other. On the drive home, Felix signed to me from the back seat. Sol knows a lot. I signed back. He's been doing it longer. Felix signed, "You should practice more. You're still a caveman." I told him I was working on it. He signed, "I know. That's why you're okay." That is the highest compliment he gives, and he gives it rarely. He has given it to Vivian his whole life. He gave it to Sol in the first 45 minutes. He gave it to me on a night when I had been sitting in a restaurant booth for 43 minutes and had been 2 minutes from leaving. He saw something in my eyes that I hadn't seen yet in myself. He saw someone who would stay when it was complicated, and try when it was difficult, and be with people rather than around them. He saw someone who was going to be okay not because everything would go easily, but because they wouldn't stop. Vivian and I have been together for 8 months now. Claudia is in a program that seems to be helping, and Felix sees her regularly on a supervised arrangement that is working better than the previous year. He still lives mostly with Vivian, in the small converted room with the moon nightlight and the shelf of drawings and his extensive velocipedator archive. He has started a new series, Portraits of People He Considers His, done in the style he's been developing, with the exaggerated eyes that tell you how he understands each person. There is one of Vivian where the eyes are warm and also slightly exasperated, which Vivian says is extremely accurate. There is one of Sol where the eyes are quick and direct. There is one of Hector the cat where the eyes are imperious and also somehow orange. And there is one of me, framed, because Felix asked Vivian to frame it, and she did. He gave me eyes so kind they almost look like something else. Like someone paying attention so completely that there's nothing left over for anything that isn't real. I look at it sometimes and I think about 43 minutes in a restaurant booth and a small boy who looked at me from across the room and decided I was worth saying something to. I think about what it means to be seen correctly before you even say a word. I think about Sol in the loading dock, the people who decide you're worth the effort, and what the ones who don't even understand they're making a choice. I think about Vivian in the rearranged studio saying I love you without waiting for a better moment. Because the moment doesn't have to be better, it just has to be said. And I think about Felix, who is always right about people, and who was right about me before I had said a single word. He saw something true. He signed it to the person he trusted most. And 2 minutes before I would have left, She walked in and repeated it to me. And I stayed. Last week, Felix finished a new drawing in his portrait series. He showed it to me while Vivian was in the next room. He held it up without explanation, in the way he does when he thinks the drawing explains itself. It was the three of us again, like the first drawing he had done at the restaurant. But this one was different. In the first drawing, we were at separate points of the table, me on one side, Vivian on the other, Felix between us. In this one, the table was gone. We were just three people standing close together, the space between us small and unself-conscious, the way space gets between people who have stopped calculating it. He had given me the same eyes as always, kind, paying attention, there. He had given Vivian her warm eyes, slightly exasperated, full of knowing. And he had given himself eyes that were, I noticed, the most specific thing in the drawing, bright and direct and already 2 steps ahead of everyone else in the room, with a small curve at the corners that on a 6-year-old's face is not quite a smile but is the shape of one, the shape of someone who was right. I signed to him, "This is us." He signed back, "Yes." I signed, "It's good." He looked at the drawing for a moment, assessing it with the professional severity he brings to all his work. Then he looked at me. He signed, "It's accurate," which, for Felix, is the higher compliment. I think he's right. Felix gave me the drawing to keep. I have it at my apartment now, on the wall near the front door, which is the last thing I see when I leave and the first thing I see when I come back. 3 people standing close together, without a table between them. Eyes that are kind and warm and bright and 2 steps ahead. Every time I look at it, I think about a restaurant booth on a Tuesday evening, and 43 minutes, and the specific mercy of being seen clearly by someone who has every reason to be careful about where he extends that gift. He saw something true. And now it's on my wall in his handwriting, in the only language he has always trusted. That is enough. That is, as Felix would say, accurate.